Well, hello, friends. Marcus D coming at you all with a brand new video that I'm producing for the Great Questions group as we get close to Christmas 2023. And today I'm bringing you actually installment number 8 in this series I've been doing on science. And today we're going to revisit DNA for just a few moments. You can tell by the title that we're going to talk about a couple of things. Number one, I'm going to discuss nanometers, and we're going to talk about turbines, and we're going to talk about the code. And what I want to do is I want to revisit the dimensions of DNA. Because, folks, when you take a look at the actual length and width is what we're going to talk about. It is very, 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 very compelling, all right? That this is definitely a hallmark of design. You know, I mentioned that in the previous video, the quote by Bill Gates, you know, that DNA is like a computer code, but far, far more advanced than anything that human beings have ever come up with. But what I want to talk to you about today is I want to just quickly talk about the length and then the width, and then we're going to talk about some of the molecular machines really quickly, and one in particular that I'm going to refer to. Because again, when you look at this, folks, again, it screams out for design. It screams out for a creator. As a matter of fact, in the known laws of science, there's no other rational explanation. And again, folks, this stuff built my faith huge. And let me just remind you that, you know, God left these hallmarks for us to be able to explore and to be able to become aware of, you know, and he didn't do that by accident. He left these as, declarations of his existence, even though we can't see him with these physical eyes because he's a different order of being. We can see compelling evidence that he must exist by what's made, all right? So let's go back to that DNA and let's talk a little bit about it in terms of dimensions. And one thing I want to point out to you too, folks, you've seen in the title that I've included a picture. I think everybody pretty much knows what DNA looks like. You've got... It's what they call a double helix strand. They've got 2 strands, and then there are the chemical letters inside, and then, of course, it's twisted, all right? But I mentioned to you before that I used to believe I had read, I had heard, and then I quoted that the DNA in a human being, if you stretched it all out end to end, that it was 500,000 miles long, that it would reach from here to the moon and back. Each individual cells in a human being, if you took all the DNA out and stretched it out end to end, it would equal 6 feet. That's per cell. But if you really do the math, okay, it's actually way more than that. As compelling as 500,000 miles is, it's way more than that. It has been calculated that the average human body probably has between 30 and 100 trillion individual cells, which is mind-blowing in and of itself. How did that possibly integrate itself? How did they all come together? All these different varieties too, cells that make up the eyes, et cetera, et cetera. But let's not worry about that right now. Let's just talk about that's how many there are. Now, let's just lowball this for a moment and just say there's 10 trillion cells, not 30 or 100, just 10. Well, if we do some quick math on that, we take 6 feet times 10 trillion. And folks, we come up with 60 trillion feet of DNA in one human body. Divide that into the miles, and what we end up with, folks, you ready for this? 10 billion miles, give or take, of DNA in one human body. Did you get that? 10 billion miles. Folks, that's like making a trip to the moon and back 20,000 times. Okay? In one human body. All right? Again, this code, that's the instructions for how we're made, how all these parts work. Okay? Now let's talk about, that's the length. All right? Let's talk about the width now. All right? And we're going to talk about meters, all right? We're going to use meters because there's something that's called a nanometer. Now, let's talk about this. Most people know what a meter is, all right? About a yard, a little bit longer than a yard, all right? 39 inches, give or take, all right? Well, then we start subdividing it down. They have what they call centimeters, which is 100, 100th of a meter, all right? Then they have millimeters, which is 1,000th of a meter. But folks, then they have micrometers, okay? They actually pronounce them micrometers, all right? But it's a micrometer. That's 1/1,000,000th of a meter. Did you get that? 1/1,000,000th. But then there are nanometers, folks. Nanometers, as far as we know, as far as I know, it's the smallest thing they make, but they may have something smaller, but we're going to talk about nanometers. Folks, nanometers are 1/1000,000th of a meter, all right? 1/1000,000th. Now, that's pretty small. Let's put some context on that, okay? It's things we can kind of relate to. Let's take an inch, all right? 1 inch, you know, they say it's about this long, you know, just a ruler, get an inch, okay? But get this, all right? There are 25,400,000 nanometers in 1 inch. Okay, 25,400,000, 25.4 million nanometers in 1 inch. All right. Now let's take a human hair. All right. Okay. Folks, a human hair on average is 80,000 to 100,000 nanometers wide. Did you get that? 80 to 100,000 nanometers wide, one single human hair. All right, we know that they're pretty tiny. Now let's go to the DNA. Folks, the average DNA in a human being, you ready for this, is 2.5 nanometers wide. Okay, human hair, 80 to 100,000 nanometers wide. Human DNA, 2.5 nanometers wide. So let's talk about the dimensions real quick, all right? In a human body, all right? It's 2.5 nanometers wide and 10 billion miles long. As far as we know, the most densely packed information code known to man. And we talked about that in the last video, talking about SETI and talking about the search for extraterrestrial life. Folks, the evidence just from DNA that there has to be an unseen, far, far superior mind behind the programming of it is overwhelming, all right? And to deny that is being completely and totally unscientific and contradicting the known laws of, not only the known laws of science, but the new laws of information that we know, okay, which we talked about in the last session. So what I wanted to do, though, was put an exclamation point on that by just talking about the dimensions, all right? 10 billion miles long if we took all the DNA in your body, my body, stretched it all out, even though it's just the diameter, the width of the DNA is tiny. Now, let's talk about one other thing. What about the turbines, Mark? Well, what I want to do is I want to mention to you, there's a video that I've actually attached a posted copy of it. I've got a bunch of these on DNA. I got DNA on the mind, on DVD, all right? It's called Unlocking the Mysteries of Life. You see the DNA right on the front, okay, this code. This features a bunch of scientists that had all been, of the evolutionary mindset, but then all of a sudden started questioning it, and they kind of came at it from all these different angles. All right, and there's some amazing, and part of it is just the unbelievable complexity within living systems. Let me remind you, when Charles Darwin wrote his book over 150 years ago, 170 years, over 150 years ago, they didn't know anything about the cell. They're going to talk about that in this. All right, and as our knowledge of this cell has exploded, we see this microtechnology in there, this unbelievable molecular machinery that's operating within the cell. And they're going to show you this in some of the computer graphics that they have in here. All right. But what I want to do is I want to point out one particular machine right now, which they actually call helicase. All right. That's the name of it. It is the molecular machine that actually, DNA, again, is coiled. All right. but it's also the chemical letters in the two strands are attached. And how the body accesses, I mean, again, this whole process is mind-blowing. They're going to show you how some of this works. You actually have to take the DNA apart, all right? And there's this molecular machine that does this. And they're going to actually show it to you. And this, they portray it like a kind of like a half of a donut, and it spins and it untwists the DNA, but then it literally separates the DNA. That's probably a better way to explain it. It separates the two strands, the chemical letters, because then what happens is this molecular machinery, this apparatus comes in and actually copies those letters. All right. And what's wild, folks, is this machine, all right, on all this, the length of this DNA knows exactly where it needs to go to start unwinding it and where to stop. And then this messenger RNA machinery comes in and knows exactly that it needs to copy this amount. And you're going to see that on here. Folks, let me remind you, there's no mind in there directing, okay, this going on inside the cell. There's no nerves, there's no muscles. Folks, this is all operating really on, folks, it's dead molecules. They're atoms. You know, look, when we show the DNA and whatnot, okay, these are, they're not little BBs. They're made up of atoms that are moving and the molecules are moving. But they're not alive in the sense that we are. But how does all this operate? How do these machines form? How do they function? And I mean, it's when you start to really look at what they do and how they operate, it's just absolutely incredible. And so again, that this particular helicase knows that this is how far I got to start here. I got to go this far, and I've got to stop here. And then this other apparatus goes in and copies this. And in the video, it's going to show you why they copy that. It's because it's the genetic instructions on how to make a protein. All right, and it's incredible. As a matter of fact, folks, it features a biochemist in here, a fairly famous one by the name of Dean Kenyon, who wrote a book called Biochemical Predestination, which was a major textbook used in universities, I guess, for quite a while. And that was his whole thought process. How could these proteins in cells form? And again, he started off with the evolutionary thought process, but the more he studied the information that proteins could not form by themselves, he and a bunch of other scientists kind of completely switch their perspective, again, based on the evidence that was clearly right in front of them. And again, it's pretty compelling to listen to what they talk about, but then to see some of what they show with the computer graphics about what's really going on. But here's what I want to key in on, all right? When they show you the helicase in this particular video, okay, and again, it's showing you, it's a pretty accurate representation of what we understand is going on inside the cell. But the helicase is kind of moving at a rate kind of like this, kind of going along, and it's showing you, because again, we want to be able to see it and understand what's going on. Folks, what I found out is that in real life, real time, real speed, that helicase spins as fast as a jet engine, the turbine inside of a jet engine. I mean, thousands upon thousands of RPMs. I mean, it's just it's not only mind-blowing the complexity of what's going on inside the cell with these molecular machines, but what really amplifies it and underscores the mind-blowing, just stupendously, how can this be going on, reality, is the speed at which it operates. All right, and this one particular molecular machine operating at that kind of speed. As a matter of fact, they're going to talk about another molecular machine in here that spins at 100,000 RPMs. What they call the bacterial flagellum, an outboard motor built into the cell wall of a single-celled organism. It's just pretty amazing. Okay, and again, it's compelling evidence of design, folks. All right. And again, that's what I wanted to talk about in this video. And folks, these are clues. All right. This is information that all thinking people need to consider, especially in light of who we are and what we are. And again, the great questions that all of us have to ask ourselves about this life and about this existence. All right. And folks, let me tell you something. Okay. There has to be a God. It's not a question of the evidence points to that overwhelmingly. And he left this evidence for us, for our consideration. And you know, when we stand before him, he's going to ask us, right? You know, we're supposed to be interested in this stuff, all right? Because this life has a purpose. And as we've talked about before, all right, this is a warm-up. In one sense, this isn't even our real life. Our real life is yet to come. And so it's incumbent upon us to become aware of these things. I mean, and folks, it has built my faith unbelievably because, again, I know he exists now. I know what he has told us is true, and we can put it in the bank, that there's a far, far greater reality coming. You know, I want to read you something really quickly. You know, it's actually in the New Testament. It's in the book of Timothy. Last couple of verses in Timothy, if I can get over there here quickly. Let me put my glasses on. It's one of those things. I'm looking forward to new eyes. I'm looking forward to a whole new body. It's one of the promises in there. But listen to this. I remember the first time I read this. And you remember how we talked about before that the word science simply means knowledge, all right? Again, we pronounce it, you know, when we say omniscience, all right? It's kind of like micrometer, you know, we should say micrometer, but they say micrometer. Omniscience, you know, we say omnipotence, we say omnipresence. We should, and I already said that in the previous video, but it should be omniscience, but we pronounce it omniscience because it just means knowledge. That's all it is, knowledge, accurate knowledge about what's going on around here. Listen to this, okay? This is Paul talking to Timothy, and really God talking to Timothy, really God talking to all of us. That's the beautiful thing about this book. It's timeless, all right? But listen to this. O Timothy, keep that which is committed unto thy trust. In other words, what he's been taught, okay, about the true reality, all right? This book is accurate, completely accurate, all right? I've studied that too. I used to think it was a bunch of fairy stories, but it's not, all right? Keep that which is committed to your trust. Listen to this. Avoid profane and vain babblings, profane, such that do not honor God. Vain, empty babblings. What are we talking about here? And oppositions of science, falsely so called. How about that? O Timothy, keep that which is committed to thy trust. Avoid profane and vain babblings and oppositions of science, falsely so called. Right in the book. I remember the first time I read that, I'm like, wow, check that out. Because this book is timeless. God is outside of time. He knew what we were going to be dealing with. And look, evolution is not a modern thing. Okay? The ancient pagans, we talked about that. Go back and check out that video that I did on the origins of the world's religions and where it all came from. It's the age-long battle against God and his mindset. And again, putting forth false evidence, you know, scientifically sounding rhetoric, you know, that doesn't really have any basis. So I wanted to share that with you again, okay? Remember, the DNA in a human being, 10 billion miles long, 2.5 nanometers wide, with a little jet engine in there, protein machine that's winding it and unwinding it so the rest of the cell can read the instructions on how to make us and keep us running. And again, folks, that's all going on autopilot without our even awareness. Can you imagine if we had to run all that? It's all working by itself. It is compelling evidence of design and a designer, and compelling evidence that this life has purpose and a blessed hope beyond this life that we can anchor our souls in. Okay? So yeah, gang, once again, love sharing this stuff with you because it's stuff I learned and I was interested in. It's tremendously built my faith, and I know it will for you too. And that's what this life is all about, connecting with this God, because we're going to be rewarded in ways that we can't even imagine, because we're dealing with a God who's capable of all. You know, I'll just say this, you know, when I see the capacity that he has to do all of this, and he's got to be upholding it. He's got to be running it all on a level, folks, because it won't even stay together chemically. I mean, and I don't want to get into that right now. But what what can't he do for us? And it's amazing in that book what he really shares with us. And that's what I'm going to do a little more of the science stuff because, again, it's important. But what I really want to get into, and I'm going to get into, is what's coming, what I've learned about that. Because that's what's the most exciting part. And it's something we want to be ready for. We want to make sure we're a part of and that we max out that reality while we have the opportunity to do so, because this life determines that, folks. So anyway, yeah, God bless you guys and have a wonder-filled day, a week, intervening time until we have the opportunity, Lord willing, to talk again. Okay, God bless you. Bye-bye now.